at the end of the day, like I think what happens is no matter how amazing of a product you build, how amazing of like an application you build, what matters is that like if someone is willing to pay for it. So I think like both startups gave me like the lesson is that like distribution and finding customers who are willing to pay is actually the most important thing.
Welcome to Superhuman AI, the podcast where you learn what's going on in AI and how you can use it. I'm Zain, I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Hassan Bhatti. Hassan is one of the few entrepreneurs who's not only built and sold one, but two AI startups. In this conversation, we'll learn how Hassan found the ideas for his startups, how he built them, and most importantly, how he sold those startups. We'll also talk about what's coming up in AI and what he's excited about. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Let's dive right in. Thank you for joining us. So I think you're one of the most interesting people in AI right now because most people struggle to build and sell one AI company, but you've done it twice. So I thought I'd sit down with you and ask you a few questions about how you found the opportunity, how you build these companies, and finally how you exited these companies. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Tell me and the audience a little bit about who you are and what you've done so far.
Yeah, happy to. So I originally grew up in Pakistan, moved to Canada around 15 years ago. Academically, I have a law degree and a degree in physics, which is like an interesting combination. And I've spent most of my time building two startups and working at one large company, which a lot of your audience may know, called Snowflake. I was there pre-IPO, which is like by itself an amazing experience as well. And the two AI companies I built, one was in the data privacy space, which actually Snowflake acquired, and that's how I ended up at Snowflake. And then the second AI company which I built was in the medical space, building AI-assisted medical coding and auditing, which in essence, in North America, every hospital has to take your clinical documents and send it to insurance, and that's the process we were automating.
Awesome, great. And how much did both companies sell for?
Yes, that's always a golden question. Both companies sold for 8 figures, and I can say that everyone ended up making some good money in the process.
Wow, that's incredible. Those are pretty big outcomes for two startups in a row. Can you tell us a little bit about the first one? Like how, what were you doing before that and how did you find the opportunity?
So right out of kind of college, I ended up working in the AI space. The first company I spent time on was actually in the computer vision space. It's like early 2014, 2015 days when autonomous cars were just starting to become a thing. So we kind of spent time building computer vision models for autonomous drones. So that's kind of got me into the data AI space. From there, then I moved towards a lab at University of Toronto, working with a lot of researchers on machine learning, quantum computing, quantum machine learning. One of the biggest problems in this lab, as I worked with a lot of different types of companies across industries, I saw is that to generate amazing outcomes in AI, machine learning, you needed access to data. And you had all this public data, but like the real value was actually held in a lot of times in sensitive data, like your health records, your financial records. And that data was private. So you cannot just like give machine learning models access to that. So how do you kind of access this data while ensuring the privacy of the user? And that's where the first company kind of started. I fortunately met some researchers who were already working on this through this lab, and they had figured out some interesting things. And I joined forces with them to start building this company.
That's pretty cool. So, you met these folks. Seems like you have an interesting opportunity. What did you on your end do to decide that this is the right opportunity to work on and these are the right people to work with?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, right? Like as you kind of assess a startup, like how do you decide like, hey, this is a good opportunity? I think like you need like either a unique insight either into the technology or the market. In this case, we understood that like, hey, AI is moving upwards. Like this is a technology trend which is not going to decelerate. So this is going to accelerating trend. We also understood that like access to sensitive data, the demand for that is going to increase, not decrease. And this technology had been proven in the labs, but the application of this technology had not happened in the industry. So there's a unique kind of like way of us kind of adding to this workflow and benefiting from this trend. So that was like the first thing. The second thing was the team. I think like a good team at a startup requires like a hustler personality, a builder, and a researcher personality, especially if you're doing a deep tech project. In this case, we had a very great group of co-founders. Someone who had already sold a company before, had worked at like large engineering companies, researchers from like leading universities, myself. So that was like one of the big selling point. Third, you need great investors. We had some of the best deep tech investors. One of them is called Lux Capital. Thirdly, I think you need access to early design customers, a strong distribution. And we were already talking to Fortune 500 companies who were interested in this. So I think all these things kind of came together for us to say, like, hey, this is a good opportunity and we may have a chance to build something big.
So like you found this idea, you found this interesting team, you have these, lessons that you're applying in order to build a startup. Can you tell me a little bit about how you built the first version of your product and how you found your first customers for that?
Yeah, I think like both the two companies I did are slightly different. So in the first case, I think we had this like unique technical insight. So a lot of the work which we needed to do was to take this research into a packaged application, which actually we can like showcase a customer. So like a lot of legwork was needed before we can even go show an MVP to a customer because there was a lot of technical nuances to this process. So here, like a lot of early work. While in the second kind of case, when I was doing the AI medical assisted coding, literally within 2 weeks, we built like a visual UI dashboard, and we were at hospitals showcasing the user of like, hey, this is like a workflow product. You can just like click through Figma. While in the first one, it was a lot of like back end work before we were able to get to the Figma process. So I think two different processes were followed.
Interesting. And then how did you, so okay, you've built this MVP, you're taking it to these customers. How did you validate the product with the customers? And at what point did you know you have product market fit?
Unfortunately, the first company we didn't get product market fit. I think like what we realized after we worked with like two Fortune 500 companies who were like, I think were very active in this space, that we were too early for the market. Even though there were privacy regulations coming out like GDPR, CCPA, all of these things were happening, customers were just not willing to still buy a data privacy product for ML. They were just willing to take the risk of saying like, hey, like, if we get fined on using some sensitive data in ML, like, we'll pay the fine. This is like these regulations are still in the vague area or the gray area. So the demand they understood the impact our product can create for them. They understood the value of it, but the willingness to spend money on this problem was just not there. That was like a unique kind of like experience for me for my first startup.
You said something very interesting around timing. You said that with the first one, you didn't have product market fit because of timing. With the second one, it definitely does seem like you had product market fit and you got the timing right. So, talk a little bit about timing. And then, how do you know or how can you measure or validate if the timing for building a product or building a startup is right, or maybe if it's too premature at that point?
Yeah, I think it's a very hard and tough question and it's like a fine balance. I think in the first experience, we believed that the world required something. What we were unable to achieve is that like a lot of the customers said, we agree with you, this would happen. I don't think like today we need to spend money on this. And at the end of the day, like I think what happens is no matter how amazing of a product you build, how amazing of like an application you build, what matters is that like if someone is willing to pay for it. So I think like both startups gave me like the lesson is that like distribution and finding customers who are willing to pay is actually the most important thing. And in the second company, I think what worked in our favor is that the timing was slightly better because we already had organizations who were had a budget allocated to that problem. They were spending it already towards certain type of companies. Those companies just had a bad technology or they were services shops. So here, like, it was a much better way, a much easier thing for us to do where we can just go to someone and say, hey, you already have allocated a budget for this problem. You are already giving it to like X vendor. We can do a better job than this vendor by XYZ. Hey, let's do a pilot and we can work with you to showcase and benchmark this against your existing workflow. And then, that's a much easier conversation to have. While in the first one, we had to convince someone, hey, you need to change your whole workflow to create a new workflow and then integrate us into that. Like that's a very tough conversation to do. That's why, like, I think like if timing becomes easier, if like an organization is already spending money in that category, they're maybe doing it on services shops or like worse technology, and you can do a better job. Like it's a much easier conversation to do.
So the key lesson that I'm picking up there from the part about timing is that if a company or an industry has started allocating budget, like that's a good time for you to get in and start building. But if it doesn't have a budget yet, if there's been no allocation yet, it might be too soon, it might be on time, but there's like no real way to know. So there's a little bit of risk involved with timing. But obviously the flip side there, I assume, is, once the budget is being allocated, is, you're not the only company looking at it, everyone's looking at it, and you de-risk the timing, but then you're also facing more competition, right?
You're like right on, right? Like obviously, if the timing is perfect, then it might be too late because there might be a lot of competitors. So I think like actually like it just goes back fundamentally to how do you think of problems to solve. With these two experiences, my time spent at Snowflake, what I've realized is that like whatever problems you want to solve is you want to make sure that your distribution or go to market muscle is pretty strong, because like a strong go to market and distribution muscle allows you to take even amazing technology and pivot into use cases where there's willingness to pay. If your distribution and go to market muscle is weak, it's very hard to pivot within the constraints you may have if you raise like a small seed round or series A round. So I think that is one thing to really consider. And I think the second thing to consider, like really try to assess uh, industries at the inflection point. So I think ChatGPT and this LLM wave we are living in, I think is a great example. A lot of industries where there's unstructured data, which is majority of it, healthcare being one of it, are at an inflection point. And there are a lot of people building for several use cases already. But if you have a better distribution muscle, you understand the workflow better, so you can build a better UI UX. Suddenly, you can like beat out a lot of competition, even though they might be trying to do the same thing, because your ability to get to the customer is faster and better. Your ability to understand the workflow and the UI UX is better, so you can leverage a lot of the technology to like service and something
Hmm.
valuable.
Talk to me a little bit more about the distribution and go-to-market piece. Like both of your companies were, seems like both of them were B2B/enterprise. Like, how do you build an effective go-to-market strategy or build that, distribution muscle if you're in the enterprise space and you're building, trying to build an AI startup?
Yeah, so I think the previous approach or wisdom pre-COVID was that hey, you needed, if you're building a B2B AI startup, you start off by finding some design customers. Those design customers kind of become your pilot or proof of concept customers. You prove out like a lot of value and ROI there. Then you take it to like a bigger set of pilot customers, and then you work with them. Then you start hiring enterprise sales reps. You start showing up at conferences, doing a lot of product marketing, and a lot of conference work. And these enterprise reps start owning geographies and start scaling it. So a lot of money goes into like sales and marketing for you to get more customers. I think what COVID did was that you kind of opened up a virtual world. So conferences kind of went out. So you can like really reach out to people digitally. And I think like through COVID, we found a new wave of like channels and distribution as well. So I think fundamentally, if you look at all of these like new channels which have opened up, like it's all about like where is the customer who's willing to spend money spending their time. If they're still spending their time at the conferences, so you just need to be there. If they're spending the time like on LinkedIn, you need to be there. If they're spending time reading a newsletter, you need to be there. If they're spending the time like just on a phone call and never going to read your email, so you got to give them cold calls. So I think to build like a good go to market muscle, you really need to look at your industry, your niche, and really understand like what are the unique levers which can be pulled and pushed for you to get in front of the customer. Once you get them connected with you, then giving them the information to say like, hey, is this something they need? If they need something, then giving them all the relevant content or via conversation, async, to make an informed decision. I think this is kind of like the way to think about the process.
I just had one question about the process. In the beginning, you said that you need to find design customers, right? So I think beyond that, that made a lot of sense. But how do you find a design customer?
So for us, like, like what we did for these two companies, for one of them, we actually reached out to like almost 300 plus individuals across hospitals and healthcare organizations. And this is like more of like an interview process or like request for access or guidance in a way. Like we're not trying to sell them anything. We're not trying to tell them like, hey, you're building something amazing, so you should buy it. We're instead saying like, hey, this is some insights we have. You work in this type of situation. You're the expert. We want to validate, like, would you agree with these insights or do you disagree? If you disagree, can you give us your perspective? So I think the approach needs to be, especially if you're not from that industry or you're entering a new industry, is making sure that you are opening up to feedback to individuals. A lot of experts like love giving feedback. So leveraging that emotional component, I think,
Mhm.
is super important. I think second piece is that if you, let's say, don't have the ability to go reach out to 300, 400 people, finding channels which will give you that access to initially find like a very big set of folks who are willing to talk to you and get like initial conversations. And from this list, you will start distilling people who are willing to have a follow-up conversation with you. And then from that list, you will be like distill it further down to the people who are willing to have a phone call with you. And from those phone calls, you will identify folks who will become your design customers in essence. It's really like just like taking a pipeline approach. But you initially need, again, a very big a channel which will allow you to like give you access to like a lot of individuals who are willing to kind of interact with you, answer your questions, and willing to give you some feedback and advice.
I feel like we have some really good insight on how to find the opportunity, how to find the team, and then how to sort of, find customers that validate your product. Let's get to the juicy part, right? Like, how do you decide that it's time to sell your startup? And then how do you find these folks you want to sell your startup to? I'd love to hear, more specific examples of how you did it for both of your companies as well.
I think like really it really depends on like the type of company you're running, right? Like for the first one, what we realize is that hey, we have like a good IP on a technical side, but we're really early to the market. And realistically speaking, if you go raise another round of funding, we can because we have like some good IP, we have a very solid team. But our pathway to becoming uh, a higher revenue company or like generating like the revenue is hard because the market is still early. So that was like one decision point for us to make as a team. And then the question is that, hey, which path do you want to go down? You want to raise a round of funding and continue down this for like 3-4 years and see like, hey, if the market changes, or you feel like your IP is worth something where someone who already has some distribution and is trying to also solve a similar problem and you can plug into that. So we made that choice. And the way you kind of like identify this selling playbook is also like understanding like which companies who are maybe multiple steps ahead of you are either in the adjacent space, similar areas, their product roadmaps can benefit from what you're doing. If you don't understand like your competition, your adjacent spaces, it's really hard to sell, especially in the Series A seed stages. So that was like something which we did as well. And Snowflake was one of the few players we identified in the process where they were trying to build a data marketplace. They were trying to do data sharing. They were trying to like make data privacy a key part of this. So we thought like, hey, it made sense for us to connect with them. And through one of our customers, actually, we were introduced to them as someone they were using to do data privacy and like, use our software to take sensitive financial data for machine learning purposes. And that's how like the conversation started. And as I said right earlier, it's really about the product roadmaps at these acquisitions. So Snowflake's product roadmap could benefit from what we were building and our IP. And that's how the process started. You usually end up talking to someone on the product team or the corp dev team. Then the corp dev team either takes you to the product team or vice versa. And you just keep going up the product org till the key teams who are responsible for the pieces where your product will make an impact say like, yes, it's a better decision for us to buy this instead of building it ourselves, and having this technical talent and team talent as part of our organization will actually be a net positive. And then things start going into like terms, discussions, how do we make it happen? So that's kind of like where the first company came in. The second company was also similar, but the benefit for us here was that we had like a lot of revenue. So that made the conversation about IP, distribution, and also about like, hey, we can go to organizations which are trying to enter the space we are in because we can come like they're kind of like a division in that. And that's how we sold that process as well. And here, you have slightly bigger list of customers because you can go to folks who are in similar areas, adjacent areas, people who are trying to build in these areas as well. It's like everything is kind of fair game. So like your breadth of prospects of who are going to buy becomes higher.
So I'm hearing two key strategies. If you're looking for an acquirer, so number one, you can research, the product roadmap and try to get into the sort of product org and try to sell from that direction. Or you go to the corporate development team and pitch them, and they maybe connect you with the product org and a decision gets made. In your opinion, which is the right way to go? Like, do you want to start off with corp dev and then get access to their product team, or do you feel like getting into the product team first is a more effective strategy?
Yeah, I think like the best effective strategy is really like identify organizations you think like are in just affair, which eventually can become partners or acquirers. Understand their product roadmap, identify some contacts in the product org, and build some relationships with them. So like either they're like your partners or just like people just exchanging notes in the industry. Like that's fundamental. Uh, and ideally, like those channels is where the conversation starts because that will be like much more meaningful. And if you don't have really relationships, then like you got to go to the corp dev teams, and they will be chatting with the product org internally as well to identify if there's a need. And if there's a need, like then they will set up like the follow up conversations. But I think if you can start the conversation in the product org, you already have relationships there. Your life will be significantly easier.
You've built two AI companies right now. You've sold both of them. You're one of the few people in the world who's done this. Are there any sort of like recurring patterns or any sort of like key frameworks that you've learned for building AI companies? And I'd love to hear more about that. And if you could just share that with the audience.
I think like pre LLM wave and Gen AI wave, I think building an AI company was significantly harder. Just to be totally honest, right? Like you had base level models which were just not that good, so you needed a lot more post training data. Building the infrastructure to train these models was significantly hard. Even in the hyperscalers in the cloud wave, deploying AI applications required a lot of security infrastructure things. So it was a lot of like work which were required. I think over the last 2 years, what's happened is that hyperscalers have made deployment of AI applications significantly easy. So the infrastructure overhead has come down for new AI software companies. These chat GPTs, Anthropics, Mistrals of the Llama 3s of the world have raised the bar massively on the base level model. So you can actually do a lot more from day zero than what was even possible a year ago or like 5 years ago, definitely. So that means that you can really spend more time on the UI UX. You can really start spending more time on the go to market. You can really start thinking about like workflow innovation. Like there's so many things which are now possible because the time you were spending just building infrastructure, getting your first model to be get to a base level can now be redirected to like actual very verticalized specific innovation. So I think that's like a very big change in the industry, which means like a lot more options are now open and a lot more frontiers are open. I think like the second thing is that it's also because of like these LLM waves and Gen AI waves, you now have like a lot of uh, AI assistant or co-pilot tools which are helping you kind of do design better, coding better, and software better. So you can like have
Mhm.
smaller teams operating more leaner, much more like cost efficiently to attack problems. That means that if you needed like $5 million before to like do something, you can just most likely do it at in like $1 to $2 million. I'm just again giving numbers, like just don't take these numbers as gospel. It's just like like the cost has significantly come down for like what someone can do. Like, and I really think like to some extent if you see like YC rounds from like 2008, 2009 to the 2010, they were like very small pre-seed rounds and seed rounds used to happen then. Like Airbnb's seed round or like a Stripe seed round, like were very small. I think we're going back into like true building phase. Like this technology innovation has meant that true builders are going to benefit significantly. People who have strong distribution are going to benefit. You don't need like insane raises to go solve like application problems. You may need like massive rounds of funding to go build an infrastructure company in this AI wave, but you don't need like tons of money. So I think that's also like an interesting way, right? Like a 10% team can build like a 30 million ARR company now. Before that was unthinkable for folks.
So, final question before we wrap this up. what are the big things that are going to happen in AI over the next year? Like, what are your predictions? And what are the things that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the next year. It's like you don't really know where the puck is going. It's like a very unknown world. Like I could have not imagined what GPT, like OpenAI, announced in the last their conference. That's like insane. So I think it could be incredible what's going to happen in three months. But I think fundamentally what I think about is AI is going to get embedded in every industry. Like I think that's something we can understand. So I think the question for a lot of folks, at least I think about, is, hey, what are the problem sets which today we have repeatability in, which we had challenges before because we could not leverage software or machines to do. Most probably they can now like put AI to use there. I think the third question I think about is there are certain problems where people were not just spending resources on because they're like it just was cost prohibitive. Like let's just take marketing as an example. You want to build decks, custom marketing decks as a large enterprise company, and like your decks are mostly pretty similar, like if it's South America or like Europe. But now if you have AI as a marketing multi-agent, you can have like customized decks for every customer, every city, every geography. It just without and the same marketing analyst doing the job, right? It's suddenly kind of like the innovation cycle and like the contextualization cycle will go up. So I think like that. Those are the things I'm excited about and I'm thinking about. And I think as like this technological wave keeps improving, we will see significantly more powerful multi-agents. We will start seeing like more powerful AI applications kind of act as like junior employees, and we can kind of train them to assist like senior engineers or senior financial analysts. And I think like for people who are starting their career, it's also an amazing opportunity, right? Like if you're AI native individual, it's an amazing world to live in.
This was an incredibly insightful conversation, Hassan. Thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot about how to not only build AI companies and also sell them. And I feel like I got to learn a lot about what's coming up next in AI as well. And I'm sure the audience feels the same way as well. So, yeah, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys.
Thanks for joining me for this conversation. This episode is part of a short series that I'm recording. If you want more of these episodes, drop me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Or just shoot me an email directly at zain@superhuman.ai. That's ZAIN@superhuman.ai. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll catch you again next week. Bye-bye.